Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine 18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. As you can tell from the title of this video, this is a VR to the tag Tarot Firsts, which is created by Logan of Lark Legend. I will link Logan's original video below. I'll also put the prompts below and timestamp my VR accordingly so that you can jump around to my responses if you like. You know I ramble. So there are a number of prompts, 10 or 11 I think, in this tag, all of which have to do with a first something or other related to tarot. So without further ado, the first of the firsts in the list of prompts is first encounter with tarot, and truthfully, I have no idea. I would have been young. I was certainly captivated because I ended up with a tarot deck quite young, but I couldn't tell you the first place that I saw tarot. I couldn't even tell you if it was in person versus in a film or television. I truly have no idea. It wouldn't even surprise me if it was just in a bookstore, honestly. Some very recent ancestors in my family read playing cards professionally, and I certainly knew about that, I guess. They weren't people who were around me geographically speaking, so I wasn't like growing up surrounded by divination or anything like that, but certainly knowing that it existed for sure. And so I just don't know what that first encounter with tarot would have been. The next prompt is first tarot deck, mass market, and indie. So my first tarot deck, full stop, which was mass market, is the Jonathan D. Tarot Pack. And this deck, I've shown this deck before. It is a deck that I would say if I had to try to think of what would be the worst deck to have as your first deck, this might be it. It has a mix of pips and Marseille pips specifically, and the odd kind of Smith-Waite looking minor mixed in. The suits are color coded, which is great. And I do like the art style overall. I'm glad that it's still in my collection after all these many years at this point, because I would have gotten this at age 13 or 14. And then I found it in my parents' house a number of years ago now. But that was my first deck and my first mass market deck. Jonathan D. Tarot Pack. My first indie deck is actually now a mass market deck, but was an indie deck when I bought it. And that is the Heart and Hands Tarot by Liz Blackbird. This is a deck that I got on Etsy. This is my trimmed copy, which some of you may remember is trimmed because it got wet. So it was trimmed for necessity. It is a larger than standard tarot size deck. Lots of hands, of course, since it is the Heart and Hands Tarot. And I really like this deck. I'm glad that this was my first indie deck. I think that it's a cool one and it's a good reader for me. So that's my first indie deck. The next prompt is first Kickstarter tarot deck. Now I had to go back and look to remember this. I haven't been kickstarting for all that long. My first ever Kickstarter was actually not a tarot deck, but since the prompt says the first Kickstarter tarot deck, I will stick with the prompt. My first Kickstarted tarot deck was the Way of the Panda Tarot by Kimberly Tson, and I quite like this deck. This deck has a great guidebook, the extended guidebook. If you have this deck and you didn't get the big guidebook, you're missing out, where you get to learn all about the different pandas' names. And there's a little spread inspired by each of the majors. It's very well done. I quite like this deck, and when I saw that it was going to be on Kickstarter, I went for it. So that is my first tarot Kickstarter. And I will put the cards back in the box. Okay. The next question is first TarotTube creator that you watched. I'm not 100% sure on this either. For much of the time that I had tarot and was looking at tarot and engaging with tarot and studying various kinds of ways, YouTube wasn't a place that I went for that. And when I found that it was a place that you could go for that, I got really excited. And, before long I was commenting, and then I had a channel. But, initially YouTube was not where I was learning at all. Looking back, I would say that probably my first TarotTube creators that I followed would have been Kelly Fitzgerald and Kellyanne Maddox, probably right around the same time. And that would be going back to maybe 2016 or so. I feel like that's about how long it's been that I've been aware of TarotTube as a thing. And those two stand out to me as people who I've followed for a long time. So The Truth and Story and Kellyanne Maddox. The next question is first tarot book. Now the definite first tarot book would be the book that came with the Jonathan D. Tarot pack. I don't have the book anymore. I know that there was one because I consulted it every single time that I did a reading when I was young and first starting out. So that's the book that I had. I couldn't tell you if it was good or not. I haven't seen it in decades, so I don't know. But that was the first tarot book that I would have had. After that, it might have been 78 Degrees. It was an old classic anyway. I know I had the Tarot for Yourself workbook fairly early as well. But really, I only had the Jonathan D. Tarot pack guidebook for many years. So that was the first tarot book. The next one is first tarot podcast. I'm going to say not applicable. I don't like podcasts. Audio only as a format doesn't work for me in terms of accessibility and retaining like any kind of information. So I don't listen to podcasts. The next one is first tarot course. I have never actually taken a live, virtual or otherwise, tarot class. I've certainly taken classes for other things and for other divinatory systems, but not so much tarot. But I'm going to say for the first tarot course, Kellyanne Maddox's trainee tarot course, this like video series playlist here on YouTube. That would have been my first tarot course. Unless you want to count something like Tarot for Yourself, the workbook, which I would have had first. But I don't really, I think of that as a tarot book and not a course. So first course, trainee tarot, Kellyanne Maddox. The next prompt is the first major tarot teaching you relearned in a way that better suited you. I'm just going to assume that the answer to this question was probably some cis hetero bullshit around the court cards. Like that's the first thing that comes to mind. There's a lot of, I think, resources that still, don't get past some pretty limiting thinking in terms of, which cards can represent which people in your life and things like that. So I would say, especially knowing that there were older books that I was working with initially, that those kinds of things would be the tarot teachings that I, had to relearn early on and had to find ways around early on in order to be able to find a way to engage with tarot that made any kind of sense to me. So that is, I think, what that would have been. First tarot deck rehomed is the next prompt. I have not rehomed a ton of decks, I will say. And of the decks that I have rehomed, more of them have been Oracle than Tarot. Oracle, particularly early on in terms of exploring Oracle, I wasn't always the best at knowing what my style was, and Oracle they're all so different from each other that it definitely took a while of experimenting with Oracle decks to figure out what kind of characteristics in an Oracle deck make one really work for me and make it a deck that I would like to use regularly, right? Tarot having a system, I think, alleviated some of that. So I haven't had a lot of tarot decks that really didn't work for me. Though I've had some. Last year, I gifted a handful of decks to a friend. I gave her kind of a pick of all of the decks that I had decided to rehome. It was a small handful of decks. And so she picked some, and then the ones that she wasn't interested in, or I think one she maybe already had, went to the library fundraiser sale. The library takes donations, and then they sell them for like $1 to fundraise for the library. And I thought, how good would it be for, maybe some young person to find a tarot deck in that $1 stack and take it home and be captivated by it. So I gifted / gave away Commonplace Tarot, Aquarian Tarot, Gilded Tarot, the Borderless Centennial Smith Waite. I don't need it. All kind of around the same time. So I guess that would be kind of the first tarot deck that I've rehomed that I can think of. I rehome books a lot more, I will say. First tarot deck that touched you emotionally. I don't know if I could just say the first deck, the Jonathan D. Tarot pack, because it was the first deck that I had. But the first one that I can kind of think, was really something emotionally different for me than decks that I have had before it was the Thea's Tarot by Ruth West. This deck felt very familiar to me when I got it. It's a deck that, I felt much more represented by than any other deck that I'd had previous to this. I've had this deck for quite a number of years now. It's on pre-order because there's going to be a reprint for folks who are interested. But this is a classic, queer feminist deck, vintage, and this is a vintage copy. And yeah, this one, the experience of reading with this, once I got this, I kind of didn't want to read with anything else. And I didn't want to read with anything else that I had before this. I had studied with the Smith Waite, with Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork, and the odd other deck that very, very closely followed it. And then I got this, and I was like, well, why? What was I doing? I'm so glad that I got this. This opened up a lot of things for me, so this is an emotional one to read with, and for a long time, readings for myself, this was the deck. I still like to bring this one out to read for myself on birthdays and certain times. It's a very special deck to me. It's one that I would never not have in my collection. I'm so glad that it's getting reprinted. That more folks will be able to have it who didn't get one of the vintage copies. So that one touched me emotionally. The last question is the first tarot-inspired artwork that you made. I'm not too much of an artwork maker, I will say. Some of you know that I have a practice in nature photography, that I can envision making some decks at some point, and that I've made an OM deck from available photography from Pixabay and sources like that. But I guess the first tarot-inspired artwork I would made, if I can count this, and I would just be making bags for different decks that I have, and this is the Thea's Tarot bag, if that's not really obvious. And going and choosing different fabrics, usually one fabric per deck, but sometimes a couple of fabrics to mix together, and making something to hold my decks. That's a tarot-inspired artwork. So that is all of tarot firsts. created again by Logan at Lark Legend. I'm looking forward to seeing other folks' VRs. Thank you to Logan for starting the tag. It was a fun one. And I wish you all a great day, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye.